Ever been welcomed by a smile that sends chills down your spine? I have, and let me tell you, it's not something you forget. It was a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where you'd expect nothing more than the occasional barking dog or the distant laughter of children playing. The kind of place where you'd book an Airbnb without a second thought. The house was old but well kept, like a relic from another era. The host was an elderly man, friendly enough, but there was something about the way he smiled, something that made you feel like you were looking at a wolf hiding in sheep's clothing. His eyes didn't quite match the warmth of his grin. They were cold, calculating, like he was sizing me up. He showed me around the house, his movements slow, almost methodical. His voice was soft, soothing, but there was an undercurrent of something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Every room had its own story, he said. The kitchen where his wife used to cook, the living room where they'd sit by the fire, the bedroom where... He trailed off, his gaze distant. But the basement, he said, was off limits. He was insistent, almost desperate, but never gave a reason why. The rest of the day passed in a blur. His words echoed in my mind, a constant reminder of the forbidden space beneath us. I tried to shake it off, tried to focus on why I was there, but his warning lingered, a cloud of unease that hung heavy in the air. That night, as I lay in bed, the silence of the house was deafening. The old man's words echoed in the empty spaces, a haunting refrain that pushed sleep away. The curiosity was gnawing at me, a relentless itch that wouldn't fade. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself that it was just an old man's eccentricity, but the more I thought about it, the more I wondered. That night, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to check out the basement. You know that feeling when you stumble upon something you wish you hadn't? A feeling of dread that starts in the pit of your stomach and gradually consumes you whole. Yeah, that's exactly how I felt when I decided, out of sheer curiosity, to explore the basement of the Airbnb I was staying in. It was an old house, with a history as rich as the dust that had settled in its corners. The basement, a forgotten relic of a time gone by, was shrouded in an eerie silence that screamed, "Do not disturb." But I ignored the warning, drawn in by an inexplicable pull. At the far end of the basement, I found a door, old and weathered, standing guard like a sentinel. It was locked, but with a bit of fiddling, I managed to pick the lock. A gust of stale air hit my face as I pushed the door open, stepping into what I could only describe as a chilling discovery. The room was filled with photographs, hundreds, maybe thousands of them, each one meticulously organized and labeled. And the most disturbing part? They were photos of the house's previous guests, including me. My blood ran cold as I picked up my photograph. It was a candid shot, taken without my knowledge. On the bottom, my check-in date was neatly written. I looked around and noticed that some of the photos had a red cross marked over their faces. The realization hit me like a punch in the gut. I was part of some twisted collection. Fear gripped me as I dropped the photo like it was on fire. I knew I had to get out of there. I had to leave this house of horrors. But as I turned around, ready to bolt, I froze. The door, the only exit, was closed. I reached out, praying that my mind was playing tricks on me, but the door was as real as my fear. And it was locked from the outside. But when I turned around to leave, the door was locked from outside. Ever felt the cold grip of fear when you realize you're trapped? I found myself in a situation that made my heart pound like a drum. The door was locked. I was stuck in a dark, grimy basement with no immediate means of escaping. My breath hitched in my throat as I grappled with the reality of my predicament. I was trapped, alone, in a stranger's house. The walls seemed to close in, and the air grew thicker. The feeling of dread was as tangible as the cold concrete floor under my feet. Frantically, I threw myself at the door, the solid thud of my body against it echoing around the room. The door didn't budge. It was like hitting a concrete wall. I knew it was futile, but the panic coursing through my veins made me try again and again. Each attempt was more desperate than the last, but the door remained immovable. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out the silence of the basement. I spun around, my eyes scanning the room for another way out. My gaze landed on a small window high up on the wall. The window was old and grimy, barely letting any light into the room, but it was a glimmer of hope. Summoning every ounce of courage, I managed to stack some old crates to reach the window. The climb was a struggle, my hands slipping on the rough wood, but fear was a powerful motivator. I squeezed through the small opening, the sharp edges of the window frame digging into my flesh. The pain was intense, but the thought of staying trapped in that basement was far worse. With a final push, I tumbled out into the night, my body aching from the ordeal. I didn't stop to catch my breath or to look back at the house. I didn't care about the scratches and the bruises or the chill of the night air. I was free. I ran like hell, not stopping until I was miles away from that house. You think it's over, but some horrors just don't let you go. The moment I escaped, I did what anyone would do. I reported the incident. To Airbnb, to the local police, to anyone who would listen. The authorities were swift, their response immediate. The house, that eerie, isolated place, became a hub for investigators, their cars lining the otherwise quiet street. But the old man, the source of my terror, was nowhere to be found. It was as if he'd vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the chilling memories of his unsettling smile and the horrors I'd endured. The police combed the property, their faces grim as they took in the peculiarities of the house. The room with the locked door, the strange noises, the unsettling photographs. It was all too real, too tangible. But without the old man, without any concrete evidence, there was little they could do. In the weeks after the incident, I was haunted, not by ghosts or supernatural entities, but by memories. Nightmares plagued my sleep, the old man's menacing grin making a frequent appearance. Paranoia took hold of me, every shadow a potential threat, every unfamiliar face a possible monster. It was a psychological torment that no one should ever have to endure. I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched, of being a prey in someone else's twisted game. The idea of staying in a stranger's house, of trusting a faceless profile on a website became unbearable. I swore off Airbnb, vowing to never again set foot in a stranger's home. The aftermath of that horrifying night is not something I can easily put into words. It's a lingering fear, a permanent scar on my psyche. It's a story I tell with a heavy heart, a cautionary tale for anyone willing to listen. Sometimes I still see that unsettling smile in my dreams, and with each haunting vision, I'm reminded of the true horror that lies not in the supernatural, but in the depths of human depravity. They say every experience teaches you something, and what an experience it was. A chilling encounter that made my blood run cold and my heart pound like a drum. It was like one of those horror stories you'd hear around a campfire, except this one was all too real and I was the lead character. You know, we've all heard those stories, the ones that make your stomach turn and your palms sweat, but you never really think it could happen to you until it does. That's when you realize the world is full of uncertainties. There are shadows lurking in the corners, waiting to pounce when you least expect it. I had walked into that Airbnb with my head held high, excited about the prospect of a new adventure. But what I got instead was a bone-chilling experience that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. It's a reminder that the world isn't always as it seems, that beneath the surface of normalcy, there's often a darkness waiting to envelop you. And so I want to pass on a piece of advice to you. Trust your instincts. They're your first line of defense, your primal warning system. When something feels off, it probably is. Don't ignore the signs, no matter how subtle. A cold draft, a creaking floorboard, a door that won't stay shut. They're not just quirks of an old house. They could be the difference between a peaceful night's sleep and a nightmare you can't wake up from. I also want to remind you, never let your guard down. Don't be fooled by appearances. A welcoming smile can hide a sinister intent, and a cozy room can turn into a trap. Be vigilant, be aware, and always be prepared for the unexpected. This experience has changed me. It's made me more cautious, more aware of my surroundings. It's a harsh lesson, but a necessary one. And now I pass it on to you, in the hope that you can avoid the terror I faced. Remember, not all smiles are friendly and not all doors should be opened.